Saolta presents Hear the World Differently.
Welcome everybody to Development Perspectives workshop on empowerment and emancipation, education through a critical lens. Nick Doran is my name and I work for Development Perspectives. I'm a trainer with Saolta at the moment, and my background is in media. My bachelor's was in media, and then I went on to do a postgrad in critical linguistics. And I found myself working for Development Perspectives, which is a fantastic place to be. So Development Perspectives is a development education NGO based in Drogheda. Essentially what Development Perspectives does is it looks to tackle poverty, inequality and climate change through transformative education and active global citizenship, but there's an emphasis on the UN Sustainable Development Goals in this. So Saolta, which is hosting this project tonight, is a project within Development Perspectives. So it's a development education strategic partnership that was put together with AONTAS, Concern Worldwide, Irish Rural Link, and the Adult and Community Education Department in Maynooth University. So we're going to go into a little bit on development education, and then I'm going to introduce Tom, who again, as I said, we're very lucky to have here this evening to give his talk on empowerment and emancipation. But I'm pretty aware that everybody is most likely here to listen to Tom and not me, so I'm going to try and keep my piece as short as I possibly can, and we're going to do a couple of quick activities before we get stuck into the main event for the night. So the focus of this evening is on education, and it's education through a critical lens, which is essentially a red thread that runs through development education. So we're going to be looking at development education initially, and what development education is, and what the pillars of development education are. So as I mentioned, Saolta is a development education strategic partnership. And you can see the consortia down below in the icons below. There are 4 pillars of development education: critical thinking, systems thinking, problem solving, and active citizenship. Okay, so there are a number of resources that Development Perspectives has online, which Steph, who is kindly assisting me here this evening, is probably going to pop up for you now. So we have a number of resources, including a trainer of training manual and an SDG, an understanding SDGs workbook, which educators and youth workers can use, and community educators, to run courses and assist you in developing and creating modules. So the books revolve around these 4 pillars of development education, as I mentioned. So before we get started, I want to ask one question of everybody, and I want you to put an answer into the chat function that I mentioned that's down on the right hand side. So I just want, it's a question that's taken from the Training of Trainers manual. So I just want everybody to think about this and put in either a yes, a no, or a kind of. Okay, so does education serve Irish citizens equally? So I just want everybody to pop an answer to that question into the chat function so that we can have a look at the answers as they pop up. Okay, we're getting a pretty resounding fleet of no's from everybody. So no, so I think we're all kind of on the same page in that sense. Like it doesn't serve everybody equally. So there are a number of marginalised communities in Ireland, the travelling community, single parents, different marginalised communities that just aren't served in the same way by the education system in Ireland, and in no small part to do with the private and public split that exists in Ireland, which allows or affords certain power relations or certain privileged power relations to either one or the other realm of education. So, okay, so thanks for that. So we're going to look a little bit at critical thinking and systems thinking. These are 2 tools that are used in problem solving and active citizenship. And then we're just going to do one more quick activity. And then, like I said, I'm sure you're not here to listen to me, but you're here to listen to Tom. So I'm going to introduce Tom, and then we'll continue on. This graphic is taken from the Training of Trainers manual. So these are aspects of critical thinking that are essential. So critical thinking skills, they boil down to analysis, evaluation, and inference. And then the dispositions that people have towards critical thinking. So these both add up to the capacity for reflective judgment. So the dispositions towards critical thinking are, I suppose, personal aspects that both bolster the capacity to critical think, such as inquisitiveness, open-mindedness, self-efficacy, attentiveness, intrinsic goal orientation, perseverance, organization, truth-seeking, creativity, skepticism, reflection, and resourcefulness. So these are all aspects of critical thinking that we can apply to figuring out how information works within society and within communities, and how we can pick out manipulation in communication or coercion or different uses of power within and through communication, and particularly in education. So, but there's not just critical thinking involved in this aspect of communication. So we also need to look at systems thinking. So systems thinking is a really interesting way of looking at communication, but and education and many different aspects of society. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a magnificent example of systems thinking. So you can see in this graphic here that systems thinking looks to take thinking from disconnection to interconnectedness. So it's based on the understanding that everything that happens in the world is intrinsically interconnected, and if you change one part of the system, it will affect other parts of the system, and there's no way to avoid that. I mean, everything is quite intrinsically interconnected in the world. So also we need to look at things in a circular fashion and not necessarily a linear fashion. This refers to the notion that if something's not working, we need to go back around and pivot and constantly review and look back again at what it is that's being analysed or that's being looked at. So then also the difference between silos and emergence. So it often happens in large organisations in particular that information is siloed, and that one part of the organisation, like the finance section, might not necessarily share information effectively with human resources. And so instead of siloing information and education and our community resources, it's essential that all of these resources are put together and that information is shared in an emergence way between each of the different areas that we would have traditionally considered silos. So again, then parts and wholes. So we can, and it can be functional to take analyses and take things apart and look at individual pieces of wholes. But as we go back to disconnection and interconnectedness, it's essential to look at the fact that if any part of anything is changed, it will undoubtedly have an effect on the whole system, regardless of how large or little the change is. So then we can look at just even analysis itself. So analysis refers to taking things apart and looking at small individual aspects of a whole and trying to figure out really specific information within that. And it's something that academia has been guilty of in the past, where we look too specifically at one really small individual part of something that we should be on some level trying to synthesize and put together to show how it's interconnected with all the other various parts of the system. So then the final part looks at isolation and relationships. So again, it's similar to how analysis splits things up. So we can't look at things in complete isolation. We have to understand the relationships that exist between each individual part of any particular system. So that's just a quick look at critical thinking and systems thinking as tools that we can use in problem solving and in global active citizenship. So these are essential parts to the SDGs, and the talk this evening that Tom is going to be giving is focused on SDG 4, which is the SDG that Development Perspectives focuses on, and particularly target 4.7, which looks at sustainable development and how education can be sustainable and how we can teach and promote lifestyles and give information to people to be able to live sustainably and create and grow sustainably. So the SDGs are, like I said, they're a crucial part to everything that happens, and they're an incredible example of critical thinking and systems thinking, because each one of the 17 SDGs, which was signed off in 2015 by 193 countries, each one is intrinsically linked to the other SDG. So if something happens or changes within what one of these SDGs represents, it will undoubtedly have effects in different areas of society and communities around the world. And as I mentioned, Development Perspectives focuses particularly on SDG 4 and on Target 4.7, which looks at sustainable development. So what I want you guys to do is, I'd like everybody to, I presume you're all on computer devices, or you have a computer device or a phone handy. So what I'd like you to do is, I want you to go onto mentimeter.com. And what I'd like you to do is, you'll be presented with a screen to put a code into. So I'd like you to enter the code 7777 into this, and I'm going to share an evolving word cloud with you on the screen now. So I want you to just answer the question, what is education to you? So I think this will be a good way of getting an idea of what people's feelings are on what education is. Okay, so yeah, if you can go to Mentimeter and enter code 7777, and you'll be presented with a screen that will allow you to enter in a number of words. This is a live word cloud, which means that if one of the words was entered more than once, that word becomes bigger on the screen in front of us. So it's interesting to see. I think in particular that words like fun. I mean, education should absolutely be fun, and exploration. I think they're huge parts of learning, and understanding, learning. So power is very interesting, because that's what Tom will be dealing with quite a bit, and then skill and curiosity. So yeah, so this is brilliant. So I'm going to take a screenshot of this, and I'm going to add it to the end of the slides that I've been using for the last few minutes, and we can send these slides out to everybody afterwards. So I'm going to introduce Tom now, and then I'm going to let him off to do some speaking for a while, and then we're going to have a little chance afterwards for about 15 or 20 minutes, as I said, to answer any questions that you have. But please don't forget that if you think of questions as Tom is talking, just type the questions and enter them into the chat box on the right, and I'm going to go through those questions first before anybody else who might have some impromptu questions at the end. So Tom, hi, it's great to have you here. Thanks a million for coming and agreeing to give a talk this evening. So Tom is an eminent academic and Emeritus Professor of Sociology from UCD. So he has over 100 academic works. He has authored, edited, and contributed to over 100 academic works, including the Moral Monopoly, which is a work about the Catholic Church's influence on society and culture in Ireland, and also Meanings of Life in Contemporary Ireland, Webs of Significance. So he became the director of AONTAS, which is one of the consortium partners that we have with Development Perspectives in Saolta in 1987, before rejoining UCD in 1991. So he is a wealth of knowledge and experience, and just a very nice voice to listen to generally. So we're really looking forward to your input, Tom. And without further ado, I will let you off. So
wow, I feel like
don't forget to just unmute yourself there. Yeah, great.
Okay, but that would be important. Thank you very much. And this is a new experience for me. I have some experience of talking and giving courses, but this is a new adventure. So thank you very much. I can't actually see you. I believe you're out there somewhere in the iCloud of Ireland, and it's quite unusual to think that you're all sitting somewhere out there listening to me. I don't know what that pertains for the future. But yeah, I just wanted to start with something that when I was involved in adult education and I was teaching courses, one of the things that I used to do was when I began a course was I'd go into the room and there might be 15, 20, 30 people in the room, and I would say hello and you're very welcome. Now before we begin, it's very important that we try and synchronize our physical and mental activities. And what I would like you to do is to close your eyes. And when you close your eyes, I want you to try and also shut out sound and concentrate on some particular sound. And then when you've done that, I want you to lift your hands up in the air and to slowly imagine that you are a bird trying to fly. And when you're doing that, I'd like you also then to stand on one leg. Now, this is going to be difficult because trying to fly and stand on one leg at the same time is quite an achievement. But I want you to focus and try your best to achieve this. And while they were doing that, I used to leave the room and go and try and find a cup of coffee. And when I came back after 10 minutes, I'd say to them, you've all seemed to have stopped doing what you were told. And they said, well, yes. And I said, but nobody told you to stop. I certainly didn't. And they said, well, no. And I said, well, the main thing you've got to ask yourselves is, how is it that somebody you never met in your life comes into a room and within 5 minutes has you behaving like monkeys in a zoo, that you're doing exactly what he tells you to do without any sense of asking what's going on here. And the question then is, who among you began to think, this guy is having us on, this is not for real, I'm not going to go ahead with this? And if that person, or you, some of you did, why didn't you say something? Why didn't you say, we're being led up a garden path here? And I said, well, those kind of questions of not taking for granted or not, if you like, acquiescing to the existing state of affairs is central to, if you like, seeing through and understanding the conditions of your existence. Now, while I was doing that, I became involved in adult education, and I realized that there was, empowerment became a really buzzword in the 1980s, and anybody and everybody was talking about, the need to empower people, to let them take control of their lives, let them be self-directed, so that they become authors of their own success. And it really, it kind of, I suppose, took hold particularly in education, training, and management. And the idea of, instead of, if you like, workers up until then had been, if you like, empowered through unions, and there was a divide between unions and management. But now the management, if you like, became involved with, instead of, if you like, supervising and controlling, and if you like, squeezing value out of the workers, the idea now was to empower them. And so that it was really primarily within the world of work that this notion of empowerment took place. And in a way, like many of the empowerment and emancipation, they are very similar terms. And I was trying to conceptually distinguish the two of them, because it seemed to me that there was some there was a difference, because at the same time in the 1980s, Jürgen Habermas in Germany was talking about emancipation, and also in adult education, people like Meserau was talking about emancipatory learning. So the question was that what was the difference between this kind of management training form of empowerment and emancipation, which had notions of breaking free from existing systems of action, or systems of thought, of taken for granted ways of behaving. So I tried to, if you like, to conceptually unravel these two concepts. So empowerment is, in a way, if you think about it, is that if it's about learning the language of a particular system or a particular structure, and it's about that is about empowerment is you fit in with the system, and the way to fit in with the system is to learn the culture, learn the language, learn the ways of being, the ways of seeing, the ways of talking. So if you join an organization, say for example a bank, and you want to be empowered, well, you don't do what I did at the beginning of this by going in the first day and putting on a mask and making a fool of yourself, because in banking culture, that kind of taking the piss out of yourself doesn't really work. It might work in education, but you would just be seen as a fool in banking. So if you're going to go into banking and you want to be empowered, then the thing is you have to learn the code of dress, the code of talk, the code of presenting yourself, and that you won't be empowered unless you learn that culture, that way of talking. Now, banking is different, of course, from say the army. If you went to the army, then to empower yourself it's much more of a physical, literally, power. I mean, you've got to learn a code of being able, dare I say, to look after yourself, but also to be obedient, to be docile, committed, and that's if you like, an army is a total institution. You're there, from morning, noon, and night, 24 hours, 7 days a week. But also then that organization empowering within the army is different from becoming empowered within something like the Catholic Church, where you have to be pious and humble and chaste and all the virtues of being a good Catholic, and so that empowerment is then enabling individuals to be, if you like, good at what they are doing, at their ability to succeed within the bank, the army, the church. And it's about getting them to, if you like, mold their way of being to become a better banker, a better army person, and a better church person. And so it moved from, if you like, a notion of specific training, like an apprenticeship program. I mean, if you're going to empower yourself as a plumber, I mean, you've got to learn the trade, or same as a brickie or whatever. You've got to, empowering is about, if you like, learning the specifics of the trade or of the profession in which you're involved. But empowerment was a bit more than that. It was about, if you like, making individuals their own managers. It was about moving away from external forms of control to internalized forms of control. So instead of people coming in and being watched and supervised and disciplined by clocking in at a specific time and clocking out at a specific time, and fulfilling that, they wanted to succeed. They wanted to be self-empowered, so to speak. And so therefore, empowerment in a way was a very subtle form of getting people to compete against each other. So if everybody is competing to be the best, then it is obviously in the best interests of the army, the bank, or the church. And that, if you like, externally disciplining people, and through that form of, if you like, rewards and penalties, it's far better if individuals take control of their own destiny, their own lives, and try and succeed. So for me, I couldn't call it a revolution, but it moved away from a very traditional form of management to, if you like, an enlightened, but it could also be seen as a more subtle form of discipline and control, where the individual disciplines and controls themselves by seeking to be successful. Now, within education, empowerment in a way is inbuilt into education, and that's specifically through credentials. I mean, so one of the things that a child learns from the very beginning, if not in the creche and nursery or in primary school, is that to be successful, to get the stars, to get the rewards, to get the attention of the teacher, and that that it's it's supposed to be a meritocracy, whereby everybody goes and using their talents and their abilities, accumulates not just stars and not just good reports, but then diplomas, certificates, degrees, postgraduate degrees, etc. And so empowerment is inbuilt into the education system, in that it cajoles, forces, constrains people into attaining these different credentials. And so then that led to a discussion, and Nick talked about this earlier, about equality of opportunity, and that became a buzzword. And in a way, part of it is related to the creation of a just society. And part of it is also related to the idea of that if everybody has the same opportunities to succeed, then the meritocratic system will function better. The problem, of course, is that you can have free schools, you can have free universities, you can have, but we realize that if you like, class inequality or social inequality is rooted in family life, and if you have the luck to have been born in a substantial middle class family with access to language, to culture, to facilities and resources, but also, more important, to a way of being that says I will be a success, and that from if you like, the beginning, there is this idea of yourself which is strong, self-confident. I will succeed in life, as opposed to growing up in a a poor working class marginalized house in which a means of a discipline and control, as happened in industrial reformatory schools, you are nothing, you've never been anything, and you never will be anything. And that was used as a form of discipline and control. So they moved from equality of opportunity to a discussion about equality of outcome. So it isn't about saying that poor people, working class people, marginalized people, disadvantaged, that they will be given the same opportunity, because you've got to ensure that there's the same outcome. So if women, if people from poor backgrounds, if people from travelers are not able to use the system, are not able to use the structures to arrive at a situation that the same amount of women as the same amount of men go on to be successful in banking, not in the church, but in banking, in the army, are in any organization. So the equality of opportunity, if you like, didn't deal with the hidden structures of inequality that are rooted in family and community life. So and that empowerment then led to very important discussions. I mean, I don't want to think that I'm knocking empowerment. No, I mean, it was really important discussions. So that if, for example, the big issue when I was in AONTAS in the 1980s was about women's education, and so therefore, how do we get women to be credentialized? How do we get them so that if they left school and they became stay-at-home mothers, how can we get them credentialized so they get back into the system? So they get some certificate, they get some training. And that led to very important discussions about the accreditation of prior learning, because we know that a mother that runs a household of 6, 10 kids, and they all thrive in school and go on to be a success, that she must be a manager. She must be the most successful a manager, because we all know that managing 6 to 10 kids, and they all become empowered, means that it's very easy to run a company of 6 to 10 people, because they might be a lot more amenable than 6 to 10 kids. So this accreditation of prior learning became an issue, and then if you like, that whole issue that came up about transparency of different qualifications, and if you like, where it worked in between organizations and in between countries, and that linked into also notions that came from America of affirmative action, of making quotas, simply, that you had to take in a certain proportion in America of black students, and those black students had to have equality of outcome. I mean, it wasn't just that they went into the university, but they also had to be coming out with good degrees. And then it kind of moved also then that empowerment, still working within the notion of empowerment. It led to this notion of learner-centered. I mean, the notion of child-centered learning began to emerge in the 1970s. And then it began to spread into what does a learner-centered education look like? What does it feel like? And this is where it does start to blur in with emancipation in some respects, because it led to a debate in adult education about, was andragogy, which is the education of adults, different from pedagogy? And andragogy was basically is about learner-directed learning. In other words, that there isn't a sensation that the adult is being taught, is being trained, but that they are in control of their learning. They feel that they are recognized as an equal, that it isn't a question that you, Nick, know more about life or the world than I do. It's just a different form of knowledge. And there's a recognition, an acceptance of that different form of knowledge. And so therefore it's less hierarchical, it's more experiential based, it's more rooted in the needs and interests of the learner than in the needs and interests of the organization or of the society in general. So that notion of androgical, now, part of me thinks that should now spread back into pedagogy, because funny enough, Freire called his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed. It should be called Andragogy of the Oppressed. But in a way, even in some of the more enlightened, Steiner approaches to education, the child is made to feel that they're in control of the learning situation, because it's all about creating, as one of those things that came up in the word cloud, was fun, curiosity, stimuli to, that, children are natural born learners. What happens to them is that they, because of traumas, emotions, of the development of a lack of self-confidence, of a lack of self-esteem, that curiosity, that desire and willingness to learn gets stunted. So andragogy, to my mind, is the basis of all learning, not just of adults, but also of children. So the question then is, I've been talking about empowerment, and the question is, how does that differ from emancipation? Because you could say, well, that's pretty emancipatory. Pedagogy of the Oppressor is brilliant. Sorry, that was a chat that came in. But so what is this emancipation, and how is it different? And it is about a curiosity, but it's about, if you like, breaking down the taken for granted world in which we live, and questioning, why is it that things are done this way and not otherwise? It's a very simple question, but it's so rooted, and that's why I kind of structural. So one of the things, for example, when I was, we all know this, but it's how important it is that when you go into a learning situation, instead of standing at the top, you create a circle, as Nick was saying earlier. But you go into a board meeting and you try and create a circle, and the guys will be dead right and say, no, wait, I'm chief executive here. I sit at the top of the table. We're not having any circles, because So if you try and change the seating arrangement, now that you might think of that, in relation to boardrooms, and you might think of it in relation to education, but it's also in relation, to family. Who sits where. So if you like, there are structures, ways of saying and doing and being that are, if you like, ingrained from the beginning in our lives within homes, that go on to being ingrained in our lives within schools, and of, it's so like who speaks, when they speak, how they speak, the deferential ways of speaking. So why, the simple question is, why is it that, as the the pedagogy of the oppressors. But why is it that the teachers always begin classes? Why can't a student begin the class? And why can't a pupil say to the teacher, "You're talking rubbish today, Miss or Mister or whatever." In the same, the language that a teacher will use is very different from the language that a child will use, and the child learns that this is the way a teacher talks, and this is the way a pupil talks. So and now to get them to think, does it necessarily have to be this way? It may well be. Yes, accept that this is we could try it in other ways, but. So emancipation then begins with, if you like, personal development. It's about understanding how I came to be the way I am. And it's about being able to change the conditions of my existence. So, freedom is about breaking away from the chains within which you were forced to think and understand yourself. So for me, growing up in the 1960s, and that's why I became involved in religion, not involved in religion, I didn't become a priest, but I became involved in studying religion because I realized that in the 1950s and 60s, the whole way of thinking about myself, the whole way I envisaged of what it was to be me, what it was to be a good person, was to be a good Catholic. And like many others, I began to try to question the power and the influence in everyday life of the church, and how they were able to stifle any criticism, any debate about the Catholic Church. There was more discussion because of republicanism and Marxism about the nature of the state and in the 1970s than there was about the power and influence of the Catholic Church, which for me is the most constraining. So for me, a lot of my writing, or a lot of my, when I say, people say to me, "What do you write about, Tom?" I say, well, like most sociology, it's trying to understand how I came to be the way I am. But the answer isn't at a personal level, it's at a social level. Because, I used to try to get the students to understand that if you're born, male, middle class, Catholic, living in Dublin, growing up in the middle of the last century, 95% of what is needed to be known about me is known by the social structures by which I was constituted. So if you want to know yourself, you've got to understand gender, you've got to understand class, you've got to understand religion, you've got to understand culture, you've got to understand, and if you know all those things, then if you're into the realm of predicting behavior, you would be able to say, well, I'm fairly confident what this person is going to think and act like, as opposed to growing up in a tribe in Peru, even today. So understanding the social conditions of your existence is crucial to understanding, if you like, to break free of those chains about which I was talking. And in many ways, then there's this blur, and I'm not confident that I know exactly where self-help books come in the realm of empowerment and emancipation, because in many ways, I was shy, lacking in self-confidence, poor self-image. Certainly most of my education made me feel depressed. And as Sartre said, there's little that I remember that was good about my days in education. And I think it is because I saw it as a form of repression than as a form of liberation or emancipation. But it does raise this question of, what's this relationship between the social and the personal? And it really is that if you want to be emancipated, or if you want to seek emancipation, then the first thing you do is to understand how you are being, if you like, dominated, and how you are being oppressed. Now, when I started in adult education, and I was teaching, sounds weird, but I was, teaching women about how to be empowered and emancipated. But the thing is that in the 1980s, the VECs were a very dominant force in education in Ireland. And they were very concerned about women becoming empowered. So they set about teaching them things like upholstery, cooking, sewing, knitting, and all these skills that any good mother or housewife needed to have. But then, if you like, women began in this thing to say, well, I want to know why I am living out in Coolock, or wherever, that's where I was teaching, and why it is I'm stuck at home with 5 kids, with a semi-alcoholic husband who's abusive, who dominates and controls me, and my only source of relief is to go to the doctor and to get antidepressants. And it was a real kind of live issue about, this isn't about empowerment, this is about women coming together to understand the conditions of their oppression and the way in which men, not necessarily intentionally, not necessarily consciously, but structurally, were part of their oppression. So this is about then developing, if you like, a language. It's about developing a set of conceptual, theoretical tools to begin to, and not just on your own, but collectively, to look at your life and to say, these are the strategies and tactics. These are the ways in which women are ending up, being, taking for granted the idea that you get married, have 4 kids, and that this is what a good life is, and to begin to question, and to see, if you like, and understand the structures that led them to come to be the way they were. So learning then becomes, if you like, and this idea of transformative learning. And it was one word that didn't seem to occur. Maybe I missed it in the word cloud. But this idea of transforming. Now it has, transformative learning is again a huge area within adult education. But for me, it's real or substantial transformative education or learning comes from not simply understanding the conditions of your existence and how you came to be the way you are, but it also is about changing them. So to go back to the old Marxian idea of the purposes of understanding the world is so that you can change it. And I think that's what happened in a way in adult education in Ireland, is that, and I quickly realized that that not only were the women beginning to tear up the script which had been laid down by men working within the VEC system. I'm not. There were a lot of liberated, brilliant men in the thing, but it's just that the structure of power within the VEC system created these structures. But they, set about designing their own courses of being in control of their own learning. And they also then, at the same time, began to take control of AONTAS. And since I was the director of AONTAS, I realized I had to get out because, not that I wasn't supportive or not that I wasn't, but it was just anachronistic, for a guy to be leading an organization that was rapidly becoming an association based around emancipatory learning, particularly of women. That's not to say that there was also travellers and working class education, etc., going on. But for me, there's another dimension to emancipatory learning, and it is a question of understanding what is power. So when we talk about, that women were dominated, or women were oppressed, okay, that's fine. But what is the nature of domination? How does domination work? And in many ways, then it was trying to find a conceptual framework which would allow people to get a grasp or to begin to have an understanding of power. It's not, the idea that it's in any way complete or universal in the sense that it applies to all situations of power in all circumstances. No, but it's the beginning of a thing. And my problem with Marxian, which was quite an influence in my life in the 70s, was that it saw all power as basically being economic. Now, absolutely, I mean, money talks, and you don't have to be or it's not rocket science to realize that the vast majority of power in the world today is economic power, and it is about wealth, possessions, income, resources, all of those things. And Ireland is a highly class divided society, and as we know, the world is becoming more economically divided than it has been. And so at one level, we talk about creating a more sustainable, greater, big, and not big, but a more sustainable environment to the SDGs. But the reality is, at the same time, economic power rumbles on as successful as ever, and the gap between the wealthy and the poor is getting bigger rather than smaller. So for me, that means that we can't achieve these things unless we are constantly aware of how power is operating. That unless we see it, I think sometimes when I was growing up, I was my mother and my aunt, who were deeply Catholic, used to say to me, Tom, the devil works in all sorts of ways. And it was that the idea that the devil was lurking, and that if you gave way to bad thoughts, or if you gave way to selfish thoughts, the devil would take control of your soul, and you'd be gone for eternity. For me, the best way to think about power is to think of it as the devil. It isn't. I mean, I'll come back to this, and maybe more so in the questions. Of course, we are driven by power. We're also driven by love. But in a way, it's impossible to have a loving relationship without it dealing with power. I mean, okay, I'll come back to that one. So what is this power? Well, first and foremost, it's economic power. I mean, but the Marxian thing for me wasn't satisfactory. That's why I went to look increasingly at Pierre Bourdieu, who is this French sociologist. And what was interesting, he had these other forms of power. And that, again, that yes, economic power was crucial, but we also had to look at things like political power and social power. And political power is the power of the state, okay? It's sine qua non that one of the ways of dealing with economic power is to have more just, equitable laws introduced by the state that, if you like, limits and curtails the activities of capitalists driven by greed and self-interest. And then there's also social power, which is that, even people, that they want recognition. People want, if you like, to be accepted within their group, to be accepted. So that's why, a lot of capitalists, move from economic power into, charity and into, maintaining their good name. Dennis O'Brien is very good at this, wanting to be seen as not as a greedy capitalist, but seen as a good person who is seeking to make the world a better place for everybody, not just for himself. So there are other forms of power which are a bit more are important, and the main one is cultural power, which is about, for Bourdieu, it was primarily about education, but it can also be seen as an understanding of, if you like, informal education of culture, and the importance of the arts, the importance of trying to see and understand the world differently through literature, through film, through, if you like, the arts in general, but also, more importantly, through religion. So, just kind of personally, one of my interests at the moment is how can we create a more sustainable environment if we're working within the existing world religions? How would it be possible to create a religion based on what the meaning of life is and what a good life is, without the notion of necessarily being Christian, Muslim, or Judaic, or Hindu. So the purpose, again, going back to this transformative thing, is that if we have this understanding of power and see, if you like, what type of power is being operated. So I didn't go into it in the article, but the other form of power that is really got to do with symbolic domination and symbolic violence in its extreme forms. And this is what has been centered to the Me Too movement. And it keeps on raising its head every now and again in the same way as Black Lives Matters. I mean, in that gender equality, women's rights, gets raised and then it dies down, and male oppression just kind of seeps back in, and then the Me Too movement of Harvey Weinstein comes up and it raises up its heads again, and in the same way as Black Lives Matter is being raised at the moment. And it is symbolic domination is the way in which you fall back so easily and so quickly into the existing ways of being. So I'll give you another example. We realize we're destroying the planet through excessive consumerism, through being stimulated to fulfill needs and interests for goods and products that we don't really need to survive, but it's the sine qua non of how the capitalist system works. And everybody is immediately kind of assuming we've got to get back shopping. We've got to get back to consuming because the whole shebang will collapse. And that's what I mean about, nobody, well, maybe, I haven't heard many, saying, please don't go back shopping. Please stop consuming. We're destroying the planet by trying to fulfill endless desires that have been stimulated through the market and the media. Here now is an opportunity to stop doing this. And that's what I mean, is that in as much as you go into a boardroom and there's ways of seating and ways of thinking and talking, likewise we walk in and to whatever shopping centre we live near, and immediately the structure, the very way that things are set up is to get us back into that way of being, that way of thinking. So emancipation is trying to find out the way in which not just men are not just white people dominate and oppress you, but that it's also at a more subtle level in terms of the market and the media. So yes, emancipation is about personal transformation, about personal development, but really it's whistling in the wind unless you deal with the social dimension, unless you deal with power in its various dimensions, and that's why empowerment is about individual learning. But for me, emancipation is about collaborative learning. Whether it's about Black people learning to understand the conditions of being symbolically and violently dominated by white people, or women understanding what it is to be symbolically and violently dominated by men. But it's only by coming together and, if you like, a collective emergence, a collective learning, and of a sharing of experiences. But I think that it's not just simply for me a talking shop. It has to be conceptually, it has to be theoretically based. What is the nature of power? How does it does it operate? So that as much as I went around trying to be aware and looking out for the devil, that we see power and the way it can, if you like, subtly take control of our souls, or of our way, of our, what I mean by soul is the essential characteristic of what it is to live a meaningful life, and to live a good life, and that the power, whereas love can sustain that and help it, power can lead to more individual thinking towards the satisfaction of individual needs and interests, which can undermine the collective, and so that's why the women's movement were right, and particularly within adult education, when they said that the personal is political. Yes, that it starts at the level of the individual, because each woman is living with, if you like, within the structures and the conditions of existence of patriarchal domination, which can be, if you like, unintentional, inconsequent, or unconscious, but nevertheless continuous and perfidious. But it also requires something else. It requires that those who are in positions of power to continually critically self-reflect about the ways in which they unintentionally or unconsciously dominate. So if you're with a partner and your partner keeps on saying to you, did you ever notice the way you talk when everybody else is forced to listen? So I've been guilty of this again, and allowed myself to ramble on because I think I'm worth it, and because I think my voice and my opinions are the best ever. But you need somebody to critically reflect and say to you, you use your emotions to control me. You withdraw your love as a form of exercising power. Or you become angry, or you become passive aggressive anytime I mention visiting my parents. Now these are all absolutely the ways in which we exercise power operate within families as well as they operate within organizations. So to be a good adult educator, then the first thing you have to do, from my mind, is to be to not only to be critically reflective about the way power operates, but you have to be, if you like, engage in actions, in transformative positioning, to depower, to let go of power, and to seek ways, if you like, that allows others to gain power, to become empowered, and that's what the difference between a facilitator and a teacher is. A facilitator is one who, in a way, for me, it's like I facilitate your education to the extent that which I am no longer necessary. So I become redundant. If you become emancipated and empowered, then I become redundant. So you're there in seeing it as a means towards an end, whereas it's not about self-aggrandizement. It's not about me being the great teacher, me being the great liberator. I think probably that means that a sense of extreme humility, an extreme recognition that it's not that I know the world any better than anybody else, it's just that I know it in a different way. And we know now that knowing the world through science and technology as a means of dominating and controlling nature is not necessarily the best way of living with nature or living in nature. So I'm living now in North Roscommon, and there are many people who live in nature around here who know more about that than I do, but it's a different form of knowledge, a different way of being in the world. And so it's about, there's, you can call these organic intellectuals. I mean, there, a long history from Freire, from Gramsci, about, working with people as a means of their creating their senses of freedom and emancipation. So, yeah, for me, there is that divide. Traditional education and training is about empowerment. It's external, it's formal, and it's intellectual. Whereas for me, organic is based on emancipation. It's internal, it's informal, and it's experiential. It's about taking, if you like, the needs and interests of people and where they are at this particular time. So then the question is how do we become organic adult educators? And for me, it's about recognizing, understanding power and the way it operates in our lives, and then trying as best we can to let it go. Okay, that's my spiel.
Brilliant, Tom. That was absolutely enlightening, eye-opening, all of the things. And thanks a million for that. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. We've had a few comments and questions down the side of the chat panel. So Finola just mentioned about the problematic use of the word education even. So what I kind of interpreted her question as being is that the word education itself, I suppose, carries with it a lot of social, cultural and historical baggage. I mean, do you think that it's a word that maybe should be made redundant maybe, and something needs to be changed, or do we need a new word? Is there or a new set of concepts to define education through?
I'm not in favour of that, because I mean it's you could say it about any word like language, or you could say it about power itself. Indeed, I think it is about it is about questioning what goes on in education. I mean, it is supposed to be about leading, but then the question is who's leading who, where, and for what reason. And in that formal education system, it was about that some people know best as to what is in your needs and interests. And yeah, I mean, okay, I've been extolling the virtues of an andragogic approach, and yet children have to learn language. They have to learn the basics of adding and writing and reading and etc. I just so I think that a lot of the basic principles of education are sound. I think what it is for me is that even a teacher in a primary school or in a secondary school just needs to be aware that, again, not intentionally, they are dominating and oppressing by their very actions, by their very presence, the way the school is structured, and that the education system, educators need to think of ways of getting children to see and understand the conditions of their existence.
Okay, so the word should stick, but maybe it needs to be redefined somewhat, or yeah. Oh, okay.
And just to say that, I mean, a lot of people think that because I wrote so trenchantly about the power of the Catholic Church, that I'm against religion. Well, I am. I try to be a card-carrying atheist. I find it difficult, but religion is a huge force in the world today. I mean, 95% of the people around the world believe in religion, and throughout history it's been even higher. So, but that's not to say that can we reconceptualize what religion might be, and to think differently about does it need to be patriarchal? Does it need to be based on a supernatural? Does it need to be etc.? Does it need to be based on individual salvation, which is my bugbear?
Okay, great, thanks. I'm sorry, Finola just said there that she's not looking to change the word education, but to broadening it out to a lifelong perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, okay, great. So Michelle mentioned about marginalized groups. So we need to have marginalized groups at the table, such as Lynn Ron and Eileen Flynn in the Shannon. If we can see them and hear them, we can have real cultural empathy. So I think that maybe reflects back to a question that I popped up about what do you see the role of cross-cultural empathy in Ireland playing in the emancipatory process?
Yeah, it is remarkable how quickly some of this is changing. In there was the debate as to the gender equality nation of the cabinet and of the government and of them. But I mean, we see it in traveller groups. I mean, it used to be that the travellers were not allowed to speak for themselves. I mean, there were, if you like, interest groups who spoke on their behalf. The same was with the disabled, and dare I say, it was the same for women. When I was growing up in Ireland in the 1960s, I mean, there were men who spoke on behalf of women. So yes. There is a need for them to be at the table, and that was one of the questions I think that Habermas didn't deal with in talking about his version of emancipation, because the problem is you only get those people who, if you like, are self-confident, are articulate, and who speak the language. So when you go into government, I mean, as I said about going into the bank, going into government, to change, you have to adapt the language and the culture and the ways of being and talking and presenting that forms part of like traditional politics, and so when it comes to developing countries, I mean, yes, they need to have represent their own representatives at the table, but there will always be representatives of others. So even if you're a traveller, even when you are representing, speaking on behalf of, and then the question is how authentic is that voice? I mean, how what I mean by authentic is there's always a danger of that it end up being said, well, Tom Inglis pretends to be talking for, but he's really just talking for himself. He's interested in his own aggrandizement. He's interested in his own profile, and that was a criticism used in the disability group of somewhere that these representatives became sucked into the system and became, if you like, more system than the system themselves. I'm not going to mention names.
Okay, so maybe it's there's a large part of it to do with the kind of the interplay between psychological and social pressures, maybe. Yeah. Okay, so Steph has just said, working in adult education, I really believe in the power of experiential learning, in having a transformative impact. However, in recent years, it seems that health and safety protocol is really having an impact on deep experientiality learning opportunities. Have you seen a change in opportunities to engage with experiential learning over the years?
Well, I'm going to have to fess up here. I mean, I was heavily involved in adult education, and I continued to write about it. But I have become less involved in the last 20 years, absolutely, and that's just simply of other interests. But yeah, I've always thought that for me, transformative learning is emotional. And that's what doesn't happen in formal education. What you do is you get rid of emotion, So if you're going to have, if you like, radical experiential transformative learning, you have to deal with emotions in a controlled way. So that's why theatre, Augustus Boal, was always of interest. But using theatre and play and to break down, if you like, because power becomes invested in your body. I mean, so the suited man is an old warrior dressed up in contemporary clothes, but it says I am a warrior. I mean, and so therefore, the first thing you ask the suited man to do is show us your underpants, and because I mean, to take off your clothes and to stand not naked but in your underpants is really transformative, and so I'm not, obviously because of Zoom I'm not not wearing any trousers, but that's up for you to imagine, not for me to, but I mean all of this power that I'm talking about is invested in bodies, and that's why the Pope wears all this regalia and these things, and the Queen likewise. But it trickles down to army colonels with all their stars and etc. I mean, but it is about ask some leading politician, did they ever dress up as a woman, and if not, why not?
Great. Do you mind if we use that trouser quote as a promotional quote for the podcast when it goes out?
It could be seen as magical thinking.
So we have another comment from Michelle. Are you concerned about the lack of diversity in the teaching profession in Ireland? We don't seem to meet requirements to have 1% diversity in public bodies as recommended by the Equality and Human Rights Commission.
Yeah, it really is. When I was involved in religion and in education in the 1970s, the whole thing in the North was about the whole divide between Catholic and Protestant education, and that led to the stranglehold that the Church has and still has on education, and so diversity has been about creation of multi-denominational schools. But even within multi-denominational schools, that's a structural level. But yes, the more there is an LGBT teacher, the more there is a black teacher, the more there is people from minorities. That's when we will get closer to achieving emancipatory education, or within the education or the second level and third level system.
Okay, great, thanks. Sorry, I'm just going to mute everybody there for 1 second. Okay, it's gone. So I just have one more question myself. You mentioned earlier on about how systems of religion might find the processes of dealing with environmental, maybe, and social issues in current times kind of difficult. Is that because they normalize focus on other areas of life, where they de-emphasize or take power away from what might be happening in those realms?
Okay, we're kind of a bit off the subject here, but Laudato Si is one of the best things I read about the environment and about the relationship between inequality and ecological sustainability. The problem is that it's born to blush unseen, because the main preoccupation of the church is individual salvation. And so as long as humans are obsessed with their own salvation and not with the salvation of the species and other species, and so that is really transformative learning. If there's any major change needed, is that the self-realization through the media, through the market, is but also, as you said, or as I said, but attaining life after death by following the rules and regulations and teachings of Jesus. I'm sorry, but that's the main. For me, it's that it places the saving of the individual soul as the primary focus of attention.
Can I just ask one question? It's a little unrelated, but I noticed that you're in the process of writing a book, but I tried to look up to find out a little bit about what it is, and maybe you're not disposed to telling us at the moment, but to love a dog.
Well, for various different reasons, I started moving away from writing about religion and the media and globalization and sex. Well, it was after my wife Aileen died 15 years ago, and I started to write more about emotions and particularly about love. And because emotions and love were seen as things that belonged to psychologists or to psychology, and that sociology didn't deal with love. And I kind of said, or I've hinted that about what's the opposite to power. Well, the opposite to power is love, and so I wrote a memoir about my life with Aileen, and then I realized that love is a very multidimensional part of being human, and it's just that there's millions of dogs that humans are in love with, and when I read the literature, there's a lot of what I would call dog lit books. I mean, a bit like chit lit. I mean, like my Fluffy is the best dog that ever existed. I'm madly in love with it, and Fuffly and I go for walks, etc. And it wasn't getting at for me what was the conundrum. So I had this 17-year-old dog that was deaf and blind and crapping and pissing, and I was wondering why I was still in love with it. So that's basically what the book is about.
Okay, brilliant. That's a very emotive end to a fantastic talk.
It's been a pleasure, and I now can say that I can Zoom, or can I? Maybe I need a credential. Will you give me a certificate saying that this man can Zoom?
Yeah. I'm writing it up as we talk. Yeah, brilliant. Listen, Tom, I think I speak for all of us when I say that that was absolutely brilliant, eye-opening, and really, really interesting and engaging talk. And we'd love to have you back again. We're getting loads of thanks going on down here. Oh, and today is Digital Dog Friendly Day in Ireland, apparently. So yeah, there you have it. So everyone's saying thanks very much. It was really interesting. Brilliant session. Finola said that's been fantastic. Thank you, Development Perspectives, for organising such a wonderful event. Well, thank you, Finola. And Sheila Coyle, thanks a million. Very valuable talk. Look forward to reading your book. Great. Okay. Tom, thank you very much, and I'll hopefully talk to you soon. And thank you everybody for attending this evening. Take care.
Saolta presents Hear the World Differently.